Thank you, Aileen. That was beautiful. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Pierce. I'm a member. I'm happy to be the worship associate today. We're very happy you all are here. We welcome you to our worship service, which we celebrate here each week, mindful of the principles of our free faith. To describe a little about what Unitarian Universalism is, I will share with you some words from Eric Wrestley. Unitarian Universalists have different religious beliefs but share a common faith. We know that life is holy, that each person is worthy, and that when we join together to plant the seeds of love, the world blossoms. Although we practice a free faith, it's one that requires responsibility. We have a church covenant, which is a shared agreement that we recite together here each week and reminds us of our closely held values. The mission of our church is we learn, we lead, we love. I'd like to draw your attention to the order of service, and there's some announcements, some that deserve special attention. Curiosity group will meet at noon in the RE group. And Wednesday, February 7th, Agnes Meyer will present on Palestine. The following week, 2 weeks later, Margaret Lawrence topic, Do We Need Banks? The UU musical review is coming. I'm involved in this. We're going to have some good music and some good opportunity for have fun. Saturday on the 17th, 2 weeks away, we're going to have rock and roll, we're going to have jazz, and we're going to have Broadway torch songs. Be an opportunity for dancing, BYOB, there'll be snacks available. Please come. We want you to join in with us. Oh, I'll be selling tickets out there. If you want to get cheaper tickets, I'll be outside after the service. There will be a new member class for those of you who are not UUs but interested more in the possibility of becoming a UU. Next week after church, lunch will be provided. See Reverend Chris. A new item, Aging to Saging with Reverend Rosie Rimrock. 8 Thursdays from 1 to 3, February 15 through April 5. Colin is going to be outside after the service to help anyone who needs to register. Today is the last, register to vote. Today is the last day for registration. If you are not already registered, please see Colin right outside.
This is the last day for the midterm election. We're sure you're registered. And voting.
The teens next week will have a bake sale to raise money for renovating our playgrounds and taking care of church grounds. Please bring your appetite and your monies. And next Sunday service is always the favorite of many of us. We are made of stardust. Please come for that. It's our custom in this church to offer visitors and newcomers a chance to introduce themselves if they're willing and brave enough to do so. If it's your first, second, or even third time here, we invite you to stand as you are able and raise your hand and tell us where you're from. Give us your name. Are there any visitors or newcomers here today who would like to introduce themselves?
I'm Renee, right here from Corpus.
Hi, Renee. Thank you. Welcome.
I'm Tricia, and I'm from Driscoll.
Hi. Nice to have you.
Nick, I'm here with my wife, Deanna, from Corpus.
Hi, Nick. Welcome.
I'm Kelsey, and this is Lila, and we're from Puerto Rico.
Hi. Nice to have you.
Mason and Patricia Mosley visiting from Newport News, Virginia. Reverend was our intern prior to you calling him here, so we're doing the before and after tour.
We literally just walked in. I'm Wade, my wife Kathy, my daughter's Hayden Hollins, and we're stationed here in Corpus.
Glad to have you. Anyone else?
I'm Pete, I'm from Corpus.
Hi, Pete. Welcome.
I'm Omar, this is my wife, Ludmilla, and she says we're from Corpus. I say we're from Annabelle.
We're glad to have you. Lots of newcomers. Great, thank you. Please stay after. We'd like to talk to you. We'd like to visit with you and have some coffee with us. We now invite you all into a time of worship.
Good morning. My name is the Reverend Chris Hockman, and I'm so happy to be here with you this morning and serving this congregation. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to all of our visitors today and let you know that please come talk to me if you'd like to. Don't be shy, or send an email to the email address on the order of service, contact@uucorpus.org, and set up an appointment. I'm really available and I want to meet all of you. All right. This morning, we have our opening words, and Christine will be lighting our chalice. We read the headlines. We know that hurt moves through the world, perpetrated by action, inaction, and indifference. Our values call us to live in the reality of the heartbreak of our world, remembering that no one is outside the circle of love. We who are Unitarian Universalists not only affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we also affirm the inherent wholeness of every being, despite apparent brokenness. No one is outside the circle of love. We know that things break or break down, promises, friendship, sobriety, hope, communication. This breaking happens because our human hearts and our very institutions are frail and imperfect. We make mistakes. Life is messy. No one is outside the circle of love. With compassion as our guide, we seek the well-being of all people. We seek to dismantle systems of oppression that undermine our collective humanity. We believe that we're here to guide one another toward love. No one is outside the circle of love. No matter how fractured we are or once were, we can make whole people of ourselves. We are whole at our core because of the great, unnameable, sometimes inconceivable love in which we live. No one is outside the circle of love. I invite you all to rise in body or spirit for the reading of our church covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred. Let's sing our first hymn, Gather the Spirit. Gather the Spirit, harvest of power, our separate fires flew into one flame. Witness the mystery of this hour, our trials in this fight appear all the same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirit of heart and mind, seeds for the sowing are laid in store, nurture in love and conscience refined, with body and spirit united once more. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit growing in all, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun, winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of wine resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again.
Good morning. I'm Lauren Cantatori-Kazi, the Director of Religious Education, and I would like to invite the children and young at heart down to our story quilt. There's plenty of space, too, for people who want to sit on purple and blue and yellow and green. So, this morning, I've asked Christine to be my helper, and our story is from a book called Come Into the Circle, and this one is called Core of Our Faith. Umbrellas are amazing things because they fold up really small, but they open up really big when you need them to keep you dry. Have you ever looked at an umbrella up close? It has lots of parts. There are little metal spines that hold on to the fabric that keeps you dry, and the handle, and the part that goes up and down. What do you think is the most important part of the umbrella? Is it the spines? If one of the spines break, can you still use that umbrella? Sure you can. It doesn't work quite as well, but it still works. What if you get a small hole in the fabric? Does it still work? It doesn't work quite as well, and you might get a little damp, but it still works. So what about the handle? If the handle breaks, can you still use the umbrella? Will it still go up and down? Can you still hold it? No. The handle's pretty important, don't you think? It keeps all of the parts together so that they don't fly off into space. And it keeps everything moving together when you open and close it. Well, the umbrella is a good analogy for what we are talking about today. The fabric is the support and protection we give each other as a community. You have a question.
Will you put the button on your umbrella when the umbrella opens?
Yes, it opens when you push the button. That's an important part too, isn't it, Alan? Very important. So the fabric is the support and protection we give each other as a community. The spines are each of us. And we're all very different, aren't we? We all believe different things, and we all have different answers to the same question. We disagree about some things, and we agree about others. So what is the handle? What keeps us together as a church community? Or as we are talking about today, what is the core of our faith? Do you have any ideas? You are a big part of what keeps us together. Love keeps us together too. So some people believe that our 7 principles hold us under one umbrella. Even though we don't all believe the same things, we pretty much accept the 7 Unitarian Universalist principles as important ideas by which we should make decisions and try to live our lives. So the next time you see an umbrella, remember how it is all held together. And remember the handle that keeps all of us different people together in our faith community. Thank you, Christy.
Our church community is given life through the contributions of its members and friends. In addition to generously offering our time and talents, monetary contributions, unfortunately, are just as necessary to sustain us. It is just one more way we show our care and concern for each other and our community. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Ushers.
Some of you might remember a few months ago, Reverend Erin came and joined us, and she had us all singing along and joining in and really having a great time. So we're going to be blending in more of those experiences into our service. This is one of the pieces that she brought with her. It's a hymn that we're familiar with, but she put a peppy new spin to it. So I invite you as we sing it, please feel free to sing along as you want. This is We Are a Gentle, Angry People, done in the most fun way you can imagine.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, angry singing, singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gay and straight together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gay and straight together, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
Last one.
We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
Great job, everybody.
Before our meditation reading today by Victoria Weinstein, I would like to acknowledge the celebration of the 12th anniversary of Bob Davis and Sue Hastings. The church is a body. May this body breathe and be together in the spirit of hope. May it feel held by comfort. Those who seek consolation, may they find it in the solace of this moment. The church is a body. It is as strong as all the people who have ever gathered within its walls. It is the power of all they dreamed and all they have done. The church is a body. It is as vulnerable as the most newborn and untried of its members. It is ancient, and it is ever new. The church is a story. It is the story of lives that are interwoven, brought together in this place and this time for the simple purpose of caring for one another and helping one another along the arduous path from birth to death. The church is a vision. It is a vision of unity amid diversity. It is a vision of reverence for all creation. It is a vision that beckons us beyond the concerns of our own skins. In the silence, may we abide as one body in the spirit of faith, hope, and love that is the story and the vision of this church. After our moment of silence, I invite all who would like up to our chalice table to light a candle symbolizing all of the joys and sorrows we hold in our hearts this morning. I now invite you into a moment of quiet contemplation. The reading today is a piece of a sermon, from a sermon I heard in a Sunday morning worship at our National General Assembly in Columbus, Ohio in 2016. And I have to say, this is one of the most memorable and most relevant sermons I have ever heard. It was by the Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd, and it is both sassy and truth-telling. She writes, "For as long as two or more have gathered in the name of the Spirit, those two or more have fought some fake fights." You remember perhaps the classic wedding reading from Corinthians, which says, "If I speak in the tongues of mortals or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing." That letter from the Apostle Paul to the early Christian community in Corinth has nothing whatsoever to do with weddings. That letter from Paul is one from an overextended pastor with occasionally dubious judgment to a congregation whose leaders are in a constant state of fierce and unremitting conflict. The early Christians in the Corinth congregation were literally shouting their prayers like clanging cymbals over top of one another to try and prove who was the best at praying. They were making their faith into a contest. And whether he was saintly or not, Paul was having none of it. The collective wisdom of the ages reminds us that the stakes are high and the ultimate prize we must reach out for in community is greater than the imagined divisions and trumped up arguments that pull us apart. Here's a segue you won't see coming. You know, in WrestleMania, when professional wrestlers have those fake fights, sometimes they really are at risk of getting hurt. And do you know what they do before the muscle snaps or the bones break in that fake fight? They tap out. They bang the mat. When the fake fight gets too close to having real consequences, they tap out. This is the sassy part. I tell you what, I'm tapping out right now, and I invite you to join me. I'm tapping out of every fake fight in our congregations and our movement about getting what I want or what you want or what we think we want because the stakes are too high and we don't have time for fake fights anymore. A fake fight about the bylaws in the annual meeting is most often a carefully concealed real fight about the values that undergird our history coming into relationship with the values that may undergird our future. If we can get past duking it out over the paint color in the church bathroom, we may encounter a pastoral window into the inner life of one whose voice in the world seems increasingly powerless. I know for a fact that the real conversations are waiting. Just beneath the surface of the fake fight is the actual encounter, soul to soul, hand to hand, in which change is possible. So let's have that conversation, the real one, the hard one, the one that requires us to keep showing up. And let's do it with edge and forgiveness, calling out and calling in, calling forth a new kind of community, both in our congregations and in the world. The real fight beckons, the real conversation about our history, our identity, our relevance, our resistance. The world does not need another place for like-minded, liberal-leaning people to hang out together and fight about who's in charge. The world does not need a place where you or I or any of us is going to get what we want. What the world needs is a movement like ours to step more fully into our higher calling, to serve as an instrument for encounter with one another, with the holy and with the world, so that we might love more fully and speak more truly and serve with greater efficacy. That was the Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd's drop the mic moment. Now the sermon's starting, by the way. So, because we're a group of people with a large variety of theological beliefs, UUs are often questioned about what holds us together. And let me tell you, it's certainly not those fake fights. Last week, we talked about one really important way we are held together, and that's by covenant, a voluntary promise, a shared agreement on who we are, what we value, and how we will be with one another. And we talked about how covenant can give us focus and help us discern if what we're saying and what we're doing is in line with our values and ideals, or simply secondary or irrelevant. Because in church life, with church people, it's easy to get distracted. It's easier to have fake fights than rather go into deeper relationship, have honest conversations about our anxieties and doubts and insecurities, regarding our history, regarding what the future may look like. But we still need to tap out because fake fights are not good for us. Just as covenant can help remind us what is important and keep us on track, we also have another form of guidance. We've got those things called the 7 principles. And you know, that's where a lot of us go when we're trying to explain Unitarian Universalism to our friends or family who are in the Christian mainstream. Because we've all heard that question, right? How can UUism be a real religion if everyone believes different stuff? Yes, we say, but we have principles. We have 7 of them. And yet somehow this exclamation is not always well received. And this reminds me so much of when I first became a UU and tried to explain it to my mom. It's a total lesson on what not to do. Do not try this at home. I made all of the typical rookie mistakes. And my parents, who belonged to a United Methodist church, they rarely attended and weren't even that strict or religious, and I still messed it all up. I said, Mom, this church is great. You can believe anything you want, which is a fallacy, by the way. You can't be a hateful person and be a you. So that was my first mistake. But I said, you can believe anything you want. And we've got atheists and agnostics and pagans. But my casual remark about believing whatever you wanted opened the door for my mom to think that UUs just do whatever they want and make up their religion as they go along, with nothing at all to unite them. But we have 7 principles, I said, and we can believe in science. But it was too late. The window of opportunity, if it had been open at all, had been closed. But before we talk more about those 7 principles, let's rewind a little bit back in history. If anything, just to prove the point that a religion that opens the door to both the democratic process and theological diversity, like our tradition has, can get really messy. The mess is mostly on our Unitarian side, because that was the side that was all about free thinking and inquiry. And this story also proves that getting messy isn't a bad thing, as not fun as it is. It's often the messiness that ultimately brings greater clarity and unity. So the sermon title today, Things Commonly Believed Among Us, comes from one of those really messy points in our Unitarian history. It was a time in the 1800s when the Unitarians who were founded in New England, Boston Brahmins, started to spread into the Midwest. And those new Midwestern congregations organized into something called the Western Unitarian Conference. And as this conference grew, for whatever reason, maybe it's the kind of ministers they attracted, the people they attracted, something in the water, the Western churches were more open to non-Christian and non-theistic ideas. And the Eastern churches, fancying themselves a little bit more traditional, insisted that Unitarians should be both theists and Christians. But this conflict wasn't only between the East and the West. Even within the Western Conference, it had its own more liberal and conservative factions. So it was really thrown into this theological identity crisis and a huge conflict. Were they Christian? Were they non-Christian? Was there God? Was there no God? Who are we as a religion? How can we be together when we believe such different things? And do we even want to be together when we believe different things? And what is the glue that holds us together? And this controversy went on for a while. It raged through the last half of the 1800s. And the rift only just began to close when the conference passed a resolution in 1887. And the name of the resolution is the same name of the sermon title, Things Commonly Believed Among Us. It was written by a minister from St. Paul named William Channing Gannett. And his whole task, his purpose, it was simple: to lay out the glue that could potentially hold the Western Unitarian Conference together, and perhaps the whole of American Unitarianism as well. So in this document, Things Commonly Believed Among Us, Gannett struck a note of inclusion, saying things like, "We believe that to love the good and to live the good is the supreme thing in religion. We hold reason and conscience to be final authorities in matters of religious belief. We honor the Bible and all inspiring scripture, old and new. We revere Jesus and all holy souls that have taught truth and righteousness and love. We believe that good and evil invariably carry their own recompense. We believe that we ought to join hands and work to make the good things better and the worst good, counting nothing good for self that is not good for all." So Gannett, he realized that the Christians were afraid. They were afraid of losing their God and Jesus. And those who fell outside the Christian theist path were afraid of being forced into a creed or some kind of uniformity of belief they could not subscribe to. And Gannett's compromise was intended to dispel those fears. And there are actually elements of that compromise, of things commonly believed among us, that can still be seen in our current principles today. So let's look at our current 7 principles. They're on the big screen. So this particular graphic was created by a minister named Ian Riddell. He got tired of looking at our 7 principles in a numbered list. So he created this circle with our first principle in the middle, and the 7th principle is the ring on the outside, and all of the others are kind of like spokes of the wheel in between. And so not only is this kind of a more interesting way to look at things, it's colorful and pretty too. So the principles are not dogma, they're not doctrine, but they're really a guide. They were written by us, the big us, for us, and they were written relatively recently if you look at the course of religious history. The principles actually grew out of the grassroots of our communities. They were affirmed democratically, and so they're definitely part of who we are. And not only that, they're in the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws. And that brings up another important aspect of our 7 principles. They are not poetry. They were written by committee. They were wordsmithed, which virtually guarantees they will not flow off the tongue, right? And the principles are sometimes abstract, and they're really, really hard to memorize, even for ministers. And it's funny, most people can remember the first principle, the worth and dignity one, and the last principle, the interdependent web one, but those in the middle, oh yeah, they're harder. So that's why one of the reasons we simplify the principles for our children to learn them. And I think that's how I've learned them too, honestly. The children's version says, "We believe that each and every person is important. We believe that all people should be treated fairly and kindly. We believe that we should accept one another and keep on learning together. We believe that each person must be free to search for what is true and right in life. We believe that all persons should have a vote about the things that concern them. We believe in working for a peaceful, fair, and free world. We believe in caring for our planet Earth, the home we share with all living things." And Unitarian Universalism is a living tradition, meaning that we can change things and change ourselves with the times as new knowledge surfaces, as new values emerge. In fact, the UUA bylaws require that the principles be reviewed a minimum of every 15 years, if not sooner, for possible changes and additions. So the origin of the principles really goes back to the early 1960s, when our 2 religious forebears, the Unitarians and the Universalists, were preparing to consolidate into one religion. Talk about messy, okay? But one thing they did to try to ease the transition was have a committee from both faith traditions create a statement of 6 principles. This statement was then turned over to both the Unitarians and the Universalists for internal review. Let me say, the merger almost died right then. The statement's wording on both sides had been a matter of such internal heated debate, right, that the whole thing just nearly fell apart. And the disagreement was whether to include references to God and to our Judeo-Christian heritage. So finally, a compromise version was reached, including a critical change from our heritage to the heritage, because that makes so much difference. And all of this was finally hammered out in an all-day, all-night parliamentary negotiation and debate. I bet that was really fun. But those principles did last nearly 20 years before the need to revise them was seen. So in 1984, some modifications to the principles were created and adopted nearly unanimously by the General Assembly, which is like a really remarkable thing for us. But, it didn't happen without years and years of work leading up to this vote. It all started in 1981 when a non-sexist revision of the principles drafted by various UU women's groups was presented to the General Assembly. And it wasn't the non-sexist language that created the problem. It was because the proposed revisions created uneasiness, especially among UU Christians, because the revision did not include the word God, and references to our Christian roots had also disappeared. Now, is this conflict beginning to sound familiar? It's just popping up through the ages. So the leaders at that time felt that if this proposed revision came to a vote at the General Assembly, it would not only lose, but regardless of who won, the association would lose because it was divisive. So instead of having a vote, the Assembly did what all smart assemblies do when they see something about to hit the fan. They set up a committee to study the issue and report back the following year. But this committee ended up doing a really good job. Its process was really, really grassroots. They sent out questionnaires asking congregations and individual UUs for suggestions about what the new statement of principles might say. And of course, some jaded people thought it was a big waste of time. But others made contributions of great value that were circulated around for even more comment. And the committee's work was painstakingly careful and inclusive as they tried to leave no voice unheard in their work. And one committee member even came up with a solution for that age-old problem of God and Judeo-Christian heritage language. He suggested dividing the principles into 2 parts. The first part would be 7 principles, followed by references to 5 living traditions we share. And one of those 5 would be the Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love. We call those 5 things, now 6 things, our sources, which are separate from our 7 principles. The new 2-part solution worked. Everyone seemed happy with this change. So the committee, after all this work, sent a draft of their work to all the congregations again for review in 1983, and then made some additional changes. And then they sent their final draft to the General Assembly in 1984, where it was adopted miraculously by a wide margin. So if you compare the principles from 1961 to 1984, you might be wondering, well, what was so different? Well, most of the wording was new, but the concepts were not, except there was an extra principle. We went from 6 to 7. Principle number 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That's the one of the 2 everybody can remember. And it turns out that the committee never really thought they would be adding any principles. But by having congregations and individuals participate, there was no way they could not add something about interdependence and the earth. They had to. And the principle's exact wording emerged from the floor of the General Assembly. Again, I would have loved to, well, maybe not be a fly on the wall during that debate. But somehow they got the words together and they were instantly recognized as just the right language and were passed. And not much has changed to our principles since 1984. Like I said earlier, a sixth source was added in 1995, Earth-Centered Spiritual Traditions. But a few years leading up to 2009, there was a committee that actually went through the whole revision process again, this multi-year process of reaching out to congregations, getting information, putting together draft revisions. And after years of hard work to update the vision outlined in our principles and sources, the General Assembly voted by a razor-thin margin, I remember I was there, to not put the new revisions up for vote at the 2010 General Assembly, which effectively killed that whole revision effort. Most of the sentiment at the time was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there's more on the horizon with our principles. Just last year, the Unitarian Universalist Association's Board of Trustees agreed to appoint a new commission to review the principles once again. So we're doing it again, guys. And at the 2017 General Assembly, they voted for the appointment of a study commission, again, there's the study commission, to consider adding an 8th principle to our list, right? And this principle is one regarding anti-racism and anti-oppression. And this is the suggested language, which I'm sure is going to look like something totally different eventually, but have the same spirit. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. So I'm not sure how long this whole study commission will last, but I imagine some form of the proposed 8th principle and other revisions to our existing principles will emerge at our General Assembly for discussion and voting in the next few years. This is a story without an end. But fortunately, the sermon has an end. So that really is this unending story of our principles. They were written by us. They were written for us. They're open to revision. They're subject to long and difficult processes. They're subject to time. They're thoughtfully pondered with careful discernment. They are argued about and debated on the General Assembly floor. And they're never, ever, ever finished. They're never, ever absolute. They're aspirational, but they're practical. They're inviting and they're challenging, but they're never too confining. And like our covenant, the principles help tell us who we are. And if we continually look to them and live by them, they will help take us where we need to be. May it be so.
Please rise and join us as you're willing and able for our final hymn, 1008, When Our Heart Is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in the holy place. blessed with love and amazing grace when our heart is in a holy place. When we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts lives within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
You may be seated for the closing words. These are by Israel Bufardi. My friends, when you go from here, know that our hearts are always in a holy place, for we are always connected to one another. Know that deep down our hearts beat in one universal rhythm. May we each find the sacred space to hear it. Until next week, my friends, go in peace.